recording. Okay, ready. Here we go. 102. Hi, everybody. Mike Cadju from Procurement Foundry here today on another original content piece surrounding Procurement Foundry. My guest today, Caitlin Michaelis from Unum. She is an amazing, I've had a couple of times to speak with her already. And the future of our industry. And let me tell you, based on what I've had for conversations with her, our future in our industry is in great hands. She's an amazing talent, really got a head on her shoulders, really interested in bringing value into corporate America and pushing the supplier and the sourcing industry forward. She has a couple of accolades to her name already and is in collecting even more on the regular. Number one, she was awarded the 30 under 30 list at Institute of Supply Chain Management, which is amazing. Congratulations on that. And secondly, she was also awarded a ProcureCon Rising Star Award, which is actually where we met, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we met at ProcureCon. I think it was Mark Raffin that introduced us, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Mark hauled me out of a hallway and said, "You have to meet this girl. She's amazing, and she's the future of our industry." And we talked a little bit then, and it's so good to see you again. So welcome to the Procurement Foundry original content series, and thank you very much for taking time to come with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good afternoon.
Great. We've got some people already jumping in. I'm really excited about that. We've got 15 or 20 people in the room already. So just a little bit of housekeeping so that everybody understands how this all works. This is an AMA event. There's no actual content. It's completely unscripted. Caitlin has agreed to go toe-to-toe with me on questions for the next 30, 45, or an hour, however we want to do that. You can certainly be engaged in that as an AMA event. We do want you to ask her questions. She is here today to present to us a different view, a different set of eyes on where sourcing and procurement strategy is going from the millennial, and I can say this as a millennial because you're about to have your 30th birthday, right?
Yeah, just under a month. I'm still clinging to my 20s.
So one of the few people who I know who is still in their 20s, congratulations on that. Except for my children, which just makes me older than dirt. And really get into the mindset and the view set of someone who is coming up through the ranks right now and has been what I call a digital native. I've heard this term digital native for a lot of years now. Someone who's always grown up inside of a world where there's email. Your cell phones didn't weigh 35 pounds. You didn't have a home phone. You always probably had a laptop of some type. And I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. So, Caitlin, can you tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about how you came up, and then talk a little bit about what you're doing today and what you're focused on? That'd be great.
Sure. So I have an undergraduate degree from Georgia Tech, and I have an MBA from a small school in England called Birmingham City University. I've been in procurement for about 6 years total, 2 years in the direct side at Rolls-Royce Aerospace, 3 years at Anthem, a large healthcare payer domestically, and then only 6 months at Unum, which is financial protection, so kind of a different side of the insurance industry. Like a lot of people up to this point, at least, I kind of ended up in procurement by accident. I got the position at Rolls-Royce, which was supply chain management, but more of the logistics side of the house. I did a rotational leadership development program, and at the end of that, I applied for kind of a reach goal position in procurement as a strategic buyer. I got a position, and I took that as a sign that I should do this at least for a while. I ended up at Anthem also by chance. They have a phenomenal strategic sourcing department, and I was really lucky to end up there and end up in the profession. So as I mentioned, I've been at Unum for 6 months. I've also been lucky to end up there. They also have a fantastic procurement department. One of the reasons I took the position at Unum was because it's a new procurement department, and I was looking for that kind of challenge and option to help build out a department. So I'm the first dedicated category manager for professional services, which is a bit of a catch-all category. It includes large areas like management consulting, legal services, the finance department, marketing, and then kind of others that don't really have a home, like credit monitoring, or the sales department. I often help them with their vendor strategy and needs. So I'm enjoying that challenge where we're cleaning up categories that really haven't had dedicated sourcing management up until this point, you know, proving the department's value and helping to improve its reputation at the same time.
Well, that's congratulations on that. That's a pretty impressive career track so far for a 29-year-old. I love the fact that you've got multiple industries of spend. So you've got a really broad background across that, and for sure, being someone who's been responsible for just about every category known to man and some that no longer exist and have gone the way of the dinosaur, jumping into professional services is not an easy swim lane to swim in. So kudos to you on that. Let's talk a little bit about that real quickly. So where do you find some challenges inside of that swim lane right now in professional services? What do you think is probably the most challenging?
So since it's kind of a big area, it has kind of different types of categories. So example, finance, you're helping a department with all of their vendor spend for the most part. I mean, some gets peeled off and goes to IT if it's more of an enterprise tool, but for the most part, you're helping them with any kind of vendor spend they have. I find that a little bit easier than the broader reaching categories such as management consulting, where spend can kind of come from anywhere in the organization. It's very difficult to track and predict in those situations. So that's one of the biggest things I'm focusing on now, is to try to figure out, you know, who are the big spenders in this area or who potentially will be in the future. Management consulting is another area where if the enterprise is doing something new, vendor spend can kind of come out of nowhere and you have to pivot and react to it. You know, I enjoy thinking on my feet and helping people get things done quickly, but you know, to do my job effectively, it's best if I have notice and have a little bit more prediction in the area.
Yeah, like I said, professional services is definitely a challenge. Are you hearing an echo? Is that me? I'm sorry. No?
It is very windy where I am.
No?
No, I'm not.
No echo? Cool. Sorry, I just heard a little echo back. So yeah, professional services, kudos to you on that as well. You certainly haven't taken the easy route. You know, it's pretty easy to buy, and I don't want to minimize categorization, things like laptops and desktops and software and things like that. Professional services is just brutal. I mean, managing things to service levels, changing scopes of work on a regular basis. A lot of things show up on your desk and they're like, hey, we need this tomorrow. We need a change of scope on even legal services. You said you're doing some work in legal services. God bless you. Wow, that's I like people who don't pick the easy path, and you certainly haven't picked the easy path. So I can see why Mark pulled me aside and said I had to meet you, and why you're getting some of the accolades that you're getting, because you're certainly tackling some of the bigger things. So kudos. Let's talk a little bit about your background and your schooling. So you were one of the last kind of groups of folks, I think, from an age category perspective, that came through before kind of the onslaught of the supply chain management business school pivot, where now we see tons and tons of business schools with supply chain management programs, even logistics programs. I saw an undergraduate in indirect procurement the other day, but you were kind of like at the tail end of that. So I'm curious, in your opinion, given the fact that it wasn't a specialty back then and you kind of dove into it later on, do you find that as an advantage, a disadvantage? Do you think it was a good thing or a bad thing? How do you think that scoped out for you?
Yeah, so I am definitely at the tail end. So I think when I was coming into the profession, some people were coming in with that minor, fewer people coming in with that major. So it wasn't a disadvantage at that time, but now that it is, the profession itself is gaining more traction, I do think it will be an advantage to entry level folks if they do have some kind of focus in their education related to it. That being said, in my experience, procurement or at least strategic sourcing, which is where I have the most experience in procurement, particularly in my experience for indirect categories, it requires a lot of critical thinking, and the profession and different categories really benefit from having unique perspectives. So I think it's important that we don't close ourselves off, don't think, oh, this great caliber school with this great supply chain management major, we're only going to get entry level folks from there. It's great to look for those folks, but don't close it off for others that might bring that unique perspective, might have an innovative way of thinking about things that can really benefit your department and categories.
Yeah, absolutely, certainly. So let's talk a little bit about how you're coming up, how you view the marketplace. I'm gonna ask as the guy who's gonna be 50 this year. God, that's just unbelievable to me. Um, how do you, and I'm interested to know the differences just personally. How do you approach the marketplace? And I don't know if it's different or not, but it'll be interesting to kind of walk through it with you. How do you, and I'm not saying that you're looking right now, but how do you approach the marketplace from a job hunting perspective? Or how do you look for an ideal work environment, and things like that? I mean, my generation was all about, although that doesn't factor into my career very much, finding something that was a lifelong career opportunity for us, right? And stability. And we're not children of the job hopping mentality, but certainly now, based on some of the work that we did in the supply chain compensation and salary survey that we released out in December with Procurement Foundry, we found that a lot of that has benefit to it from a financial perspective. And in that, some of, like you said, some of the information we got was also around the early certification process, helping junior and senior associates getting into that first and second level jobs. So how do you approach that? How does the millennial mindset look at the job market, and how do you rate companies that you want to be involved with? Are you searching for a particular company, or what? How does that all work?
Yeah, so obviously I don't want to speak for all millennials, but something that's important to me and probably to a lot of driven folks of any generation is having ownership. So when I am potentially looking at taking a new position, I'm looking for something that's going to be challenging and something that is really mine and I can make an impact on. I'm going to have freedom to solve problems on my own while also being able to speak with leadership and colleagues and get different perspectives, as I was mentioning earlier, to kind of guide that way, but ultimately being the one to drive change. Another thing that millennials, I think, find important and sometimes get a bad rap for is wanting work-life balance. But I think it is important to caveat that for a lot of us, that means flexibility. That doesn't mean I only want to put in the minimum and work is work and personal life is personal life. You do need to have that balance and separation. But for me and a lot of my peers, it feels like it's more, we're looking for being trusted that we're going to get the job done. We're in a digital world. We're all experiencing it now with COVID-19 and the majority of us working from home. We're going to get the job done, and we don't need somebody, big brother watching us all the time. We might be working unusual hours as compared to how it was one day, but we're able to do that now. And, especially as the world becomes more globalized, we're working with lots of different time zones, and sometimes it's in our benefit to kind of work around the clock while also balancing our personal lives. Did that make sense? I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I put myself on mute because I didn't want to hear any feedback. I think So anyway, I'm sorry. I think that makes a ton of sense. I think that while your generation really, and I agree with you, I think there's a very large miscategorization or misconception, if you will, that, and I think you said it very, very eloquently, which is I think there's a mislabeling or a misunderstanding that the want for life balance isn't an attempt to dodge the work ethic, right? I
Right.
think that, and I find a lot of folks that are your age that are just crushing it. I mean, you invented the side hustle for God's sakes. You know what I mean? In the gig economy and a lot of other things. I think that it's an amazing generation. I think that I think what's really interesting about you is that you're not tied down to one strategy, and you're very, very open to learning new things on the fly in parallel with other things, which I think ultimately enhances whatever you're doing in your main swim lane. I know people who are taking, programming classes and analytics classes and spend cube development classes, but their main swim lane is or negotiation strategy, work on the side, or we did some of that back in the day with our generation in the form of things like public speaking, like Toastmasters and things like that. But I think you've taken the theory of Toastmasters from the 40 and 50-year-olds and really optimize it to say, hey, I'm going to take all these things, I'm going to learn all of them in parallel and bring them back into focus for my main role. And I also think that you're spot on. I think that the life balance thing really is around proving to the marketplace that the flexibility is that you can actually all do this work without being tethered to a desk somewhere in the heartland of America. And I think that I think unfortunately, given some of the situation that's taking place right now, with some of the events that are taking place around the COVID pandemic, I think it's really going to prove itself out. And I think it's going to prove that, your generation really was the firecracker that kind of lit the whole thing and showed us the way forward. Because I know a lot of people right now who are, the work from home, pseudo work from anywhere. And I think it's work from home right now because of the lockdown, but the work from anywhere movement, I think, is really, really interesting. And I think that you all, by pushing that agenda, have really led the charge on that. So really, really impressive stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about your well, let's talk a little bit about the folks that you've worked for in the past before we get into specifics about what else we're doing. So tell me a little bit about the people you work with in the past. What type of a mentor or a leader or a manager have you worked for that really helped you out, and what did they provide you with? What was the one thing that they provided you with?
You're putting me on the spot here a little bit.
You don't have to name names. Don't name names. Just I worked for a person. They were very X. They provided me with Y. And I think that that's helped me so far.
Yeah, so I've been really fortunate where I have had a lot of good bosses and leaders that maybe I didn't directly report to that were really great mentors. I mentioned I worked at Anthem for 3 years. I really had a lot of great leaders, bosses and otherwise. That department I mentioned at the start, they're phenomenal. They do a really good job of guiding their new employees. So if I was to say some things that people have done that have helped me grow, I think it kind of ties back to giving you, again, that kind of ownership. So, I mentioned that indirect procurement requires people to think critically and have unique perspectives. So being able to own problem solving while still having those mentors and leaders to go back to bounce ideas off of was really beneficial to my career, and it really helped me excel as far as being unafraid to approach challenges. And then I think that just kind of snowballs to being able to solve bigger problems, get into more complicated messes to try to straighten them out. So I think it would boil down to ownership and trust that you're going to get the job done without being micromanaged.
Mm-hmm. Do you-
And sorry, you can go ahead.
no. Do you have an active mentor now? Do you carry a mentor with, like, do you have a coach or a mentor now that you kind of keep throughout your career, or do you find that inside of your leadership team as you move from spot to spot?
So definitely a mix of both. I mentioned Anthem's department was phenomenal.
Yep.
In close contact with a lot of leaders there. I'm really appreciative of them, not being angry, I guess, that I changed positions, and I still speak to them on a regular basis. That being said, at my new job at Unum, I have strong leaders there. I've only worked there for 6 months, but I'm definitely seeing mentorship there as well. So I think it's a mix of both. So you identify those mentors that have your best interest at heart, that you can learn from greatly, and I think you can carry those with you to your career. And it's important to have them in your current position as well.
Yeah, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there's a balance that you need to strike between going into a highly mature procurement strategic sourcing organization and getting that mentorship and leadership and structure in your first couple of roles, which shows you what procurement really kind of should be, or at least giving you the opportunity. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of old procurement organizations that are screwed up, but there's some that are really good, and you've luckily been in 2 or 3 world-class organizations, and you get the structure and the leadership and the knowledge that comes with that, right? Versus the whole, hey, I'm going to go into something brand new, small, tiny startup, bleeding edge, and I'm going to have a lot more ability to hit multiple categories. So there's this balance between which one probably works best for you as you're starting off your career. Do you want to be able to have exposure to a whole bunch of staff and be completely left kind of autonomous? Or do you want to be in a decently structured organization that you can learn from, and then maybe transfer those skills out to something that's a little bit more creative and a little bit more open throttle, right? Does that make sense?
And I've definitely benefited in what you described. So I went to a more mature department and really benefited from the knowledge and network there. But I do want to say to people, newer in their procurement careers, don't be afraid to take a job at a less mature department, even if you don't feel like you have that strong backbone. A lot of the leaders coming into that new department, which is the case at Unum, do have a strong backbone. So even though the department itself is not new, you're going to benefit, as I have, from their experience in other places. And then, of course, resources like Procurement Foundry, which are online, you can benefit from the experience of others not in your organization while you're trying to found that new one.
Thank you for that, by the way. We appreciate the plug for Procurement Foundry. Part of our goal is to try and help some of the younger folks out there to just gain some knowledge. I've had a lot of people reach out to me privately and say, hey, this is like having a window into how this all works. And I've learned quite a bit just by reading the dialogue of people in the chain. So that leads actually greatly into the next question, which is, I understand that you're getting a lot of industry knowledge and a lot of process and a lot of, 7-step theory and things like that, in agile thought process around how strategic sourcing works, vendor management, et cetera, from your leadership. But how are you, outside of your leadership and outside of the company that you're actually working on, how do you gain industry knowledge, and what are you doing for networking? And this isn't a request for a plug for Procurement Foundry, but overall, how are you doing that?
Yeah, so earlier in my career, I did things like the CPSM certification, which I did find very helpful for me personally. I had been in procurement for a number of years at that point, so I had kind of the working knowledge, but not having that major or minor from undergrad, it was good to be able to learn kind of the theory backing up the practice. So
right.
Yeah, to learn about, the school book way to approach something and think about, okay, that's a problem I did have, and I approached it this way, and I could have approached it another way. And then, so I think doing those things early on in your career, like the very basic CPSM type materials, are important. And then as you get more founded in your career, doing more targeted things, looking at the different panels or webinars offered in places like Procurement Foundry, going to conferences. So they have kind of generic ones, and then they have more focused ones, and then doing training courses, whether those be virtual through places like Procurement Foundry or in person through institutions like ISM, identifying kind of those gaps that you have, and then taking a class to learn how to improve those, I think is very important. And then for me personally, networking, in the past few years, I've tried to go to a conference at least once a year, and that's been really good for my networking experience. That's how I met you, through Mark Raffin, meeting you at a conference. I think that's important. And then, now that we're all online, we have to kind of think about that differently. So, a number of conferences are moving to online only. I think ProcureCon is doing one online only. I know Procurement Foundry has one at the end of the month. I know online networking is not the same as in-person networking, but with COVID-19, it's a perfect opportunity to see what it's like to online network and see where that takes us.
Yeah, and I think that online networking, at least from a, and I don't think we've been around long enough to actually create a best practices for it yet. But one of the things that I see the most is engagement, right? So people don't necessarily like people that are just sitting there lurking, and understandably, some people have a fear of that, and I think that the online element of that helps a little bit. Going as a 25 to 30-year-old person to an industry conference, and bellying up to the bar on day number 2, where most of the senior leadership is networking and doing the hey, good to see you stuff, can be intimidating as hell, I'm imagining. But the network side of it is the online side of it kind of cuts it a little bit easier. And certainly now there's a lot of things going on specifically because of this now, where you're getting things like, I know some people that are running dial-in coloring sessions, with a glass of wine, and cocktail parties and things like the meetups, just because of the fact that we're all kind of in shutdown right now. And I think these are perfect opportunities for somebody to come in. There's 10, 12, 15, 20 people in the room. You don't have to add a lot to the conversation, but you get your name and your face out there. And I highly recommend that to anyone that's coming up through the ranks right now. I mean, we were doing some amazing things in Procurement Foundry with physical meetups with no vendor sponsorship, and with our 2025 chapters. And now we've taken them all virtual. So we're literally doing geo-based regional meetups inside of Procurement Foundry, but virtually inside of the group. So if you're in a specific city, by all means, I think that folks that feel a little bit nervous about walking out into that cocktail lounge could, potentially break down some of those barriers.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the general feel of supply chain and sourcing, and I got a couple of questions coming in on the chat, so I want to make sure we get to that. Somebody gave you a shout out, Ramble and Rec from Georgia Tech, and a hell of an engineer. Now, we don't have you're not an engineer, right?
Right.
It's such a famous school for engineering, and we talked about this on the early. I'm shocked that you went to Georgia Tech and you haven't seen the Iron Man video yet. For anybody who's gone to Georgia Tech, or anybody who's been on YouTube, and I can't believe I've got a 50-year-old guy teaching a 30-year-old lady about a YouTube video, but she's going to go after this, and she's going to watch the download of the kid from Georgia Tech who talks about building an Iron Man suit, because this is Georgia Tech. So get a shout out from what looks like a fellow Georgia Tech Ramblin' Wreck. So
yeah, well, what's the good word?
And it's Ernie. It's Ernie Hernandez. I'm sorry, Ernie Hernandez out of Florida. So Ernie's a great guy. Just a quick sidebar. Ernie's also running our actively seeking job squad up. So if you don't have a job right now and you're watching this today, Ernie Hernandez inside of the Procurement Foundry is running a squad up event once a week for people looking for jobs. So by all means, join that. I'll take a question off of the Q&A if that's okay with you.
Yep.
Do you find, and we talked about this a little bit, but specifically, Paula says, do you find gaps/challenges with problem-solving skills in the younger workforce? I find this is a skill that I would have expected, but unfortunately have to teach many of my younger people.
Um, yeah, I think, so when we talk about younger people, I'm going to take that as people fresh out of undergrad. So I think there is sometimes a gap between, being told, here's your assignment and finish it and get an A, and then like really taking ownership with potentially not as much, or probably not as much direction as that. So, being given a problem and not being told like you have to solve this.
Yeah.
I think that is something that we have to keep in mind when we're taking those folks on earlier on in their career. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have a magic solution to it other than, just kind of being patient, trying to understand where the disconnect is and trying to get that newer associate to realize, they really have ownership and it's on them to solve this, and they're not going to get a playbook. And for people that are driven and successful, they're going to figure that out quickly, but you have to kind of make it clear to them, and it's like a light bulb turns on.
Yeah. I think a lot of it stems from, and I think your generation probably isn't as concerned about this, or I wouldn't be as concerned about your generation. I think the next generation that's coming up through the ranks right now, the 18 to 23-year-old kids, my generation of, and they've called us, I read this the other day, which is the latchkey 80s kids who had to grow up with two parents for the first time, and there was nobody at home when we came from school. And it was like, okay, fend for yourself for a while in isolation until your parents get home. For us, this COVID thing is just kind of like normal hat. Like, we're really used to it, right? But as we became parents, and as now I've had teenage kids, we have kind of gone to the complete other end of the spectrum where we're kind of soft serving everything to our kids. And probably even to my kids, I've done them a misjustice. So now they're coming out of the school, like you said, with curriculums and being told kind of, okay, here's the problem and this is how you fix it, and work through the process of fixing it, as opposed to, well, I creatively have to think about how to fix this problem. Right. So they have to get exposure to that. I don't think they've had a lot of exposure to that. And I think that part of our job from a management perspective is to recognize the fact that they haven't had that. That's not one of their EQ skills that they're going to have coming out of school right now, other than the fact that they had to figure out how to grilled cheese something inside of a dorm and not burn down the dorm, right? And recognize that as something that we need to provide to them as a basic set of building blocks as they come out of our organizations and go into the next one that they go.
Yeah, and then kind of advice for both sides of the equation. So the folks about to come out of college looking for positions, and then the folks hiring people coming out of college, or potentially hiring interns. So I always give advice to people in college, like internship experience is key. That's going to show employers that you've been in the real world. For the most part, they're going to have worked for a company that's given them a problem to solve for their internship, potentially given them experience, presenting to senior leadership. So both for the people in college, do that internship to get that real world experience, and you're making yourself competitive. We're going to see your resume and think, I don't have to teach you what it's like to work in corporate America and to take ownership. And then for those of us on the hiring side, look for those that have had that internship experience, and hopefully you're benefiting from that kind of first time getting their feet wet in corporate America.
Mm-hmm. Have you gotten to the point, just curious, have you gotten to the point, and do you think your peers have gotten to the point now where they realize, hey, if I just throw in a resume on this thing, I'm just another resume on the stack, and it really is about networking, and I need to be connected to, a lot of folks on LinkedIn, be actively working those relationships, because the reality is you can hire a bot to file 500 resumes on the active job board, and you're competing with 200, 300 people in a stack now. So how is your generation doing that, and how are you proactively managing that? Have you gotten there? Because I see a lot of kids who are like, hey man, I just put my resume in and nobody ever called me back. And it's what's interesting is it's a bigger problem for the 50-somethings, because that's how we lived, right? Mm-hmm. So trying to teach them that versus teaching you that. So let's talk quickly about that. Then I want to talk about digitalization of the industry and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, okay, so I think, so I want to say, I don't think it's impossible to get a job just by putting your resume in. I'm not going to deny it. It definitely helps to know people. A lot of jobs you get by knowing people. But I think, having that network, obviously that having that network is important. I will say I've gotten a lot of jobs purely from LinkedIn, like being headhunted that way. So I didn't necessarily know the department that I was applying to. In that way, that is a network, but it's not as personal as knowing the hiring manager in face-to-face kind of relationship. And I wanted to say it kind of benefits the candidate as well if you know people that are working at the department you're potentially working in, because presumably if there's somebody in your network that works there, they're going to give you honest feedback. Are you joining an organization that has a strong culture? Is that this opportunity really what you think it is? Whereas if you're blindly going in, a job interview is for both sides. That the people interviewing want you to work there, so they're going to sell it the best way you can. So you can kind of temper test that to see if what they're selling is really what you'll be working in.
Yeah. And I think listen, let's be honest here. You have a brand, right? You're out there, you're on LinkedIn, you're a 30 under 30, you're a ProcureCon rising star. You're active on LinkedIn. I've seen you a few times. It's important, right? Having that outward facing brand now to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. You said people are proactively coming in recruiting you. And certainly up until very recently, we were in a massive talent shortage, right? But having that brand and having that even slight voice out there in the marketplace to show people that you're there and that you've got a brain is huge, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, I think both external and internal brand are very important, and they can kind of play off of each other, right? So,
yeah.
Good reputation in your own organization, your own department, I mean, they're going to be singing your praises elsewhere. And same with external. Like if you have a good reputation external and your boss or your boss's boss goes to a conference and they say, oh, well, I know your employee and they're great. I mean, that's going to be good for you as well.
I got to tell you, and I don't know if you caught it or not, but I just smiled because it's easy to see why people are picking you up and putting you inside of their organizations. The fact that you recognize right out of the gate that you need an external brand and an internal brand is just so spot on. There's going to be bidding wars for you in the future of your career. I can see it already. And interesting. The reason why I said that is because on the Forge event on April 28th, that day alerting that we're having inside of Procurement Foundry, we literally have a session in the morning about the external professional branding. And in the afternoon, we have a session around internal branding. We've got Mark Rafford and Mark Holyoke talking about that from a let's build content and let's show what the recruiters want. Then we bring in some HR people in the afternoon to talk about what your internal brand needs to be like. Should I be doing drive-bys on Executive Row at lunch? How do I hold myself inside of a conference room when there's 15 people in the room? Things like what do I want to be the person who raises my hand every time there's a challenge, right? Those types of things with the internal brand. The fact that you recognize that and you're self-aware at that level is just you're spot on. So that's gonna let me ask. We got a couple more questions. I'm gonna get the questions. Okay. I know we had some questions prepared. I want to jump into what these people are asking. Aside from being flexible, so Devin asks, aside from being flexible in work environments, what can today's leaders do to effectively entice and retain top talent from the millennial generation? So other than being flexible, what can they do to help make sure that we're getting the Caitlins of the world into our groups?
Yeah, so that's a funny question because that's coming from my boss. But
fantastic. We should be asking him, what the heck did he do? I should promote him in and just ask the question to him. So go ahead. So what did he, if that's the case, let's change the question. What did Devin do other than being flexible in the work environment to entice you and retain you as talent inside of his organization? How's that? Better question?
Yeah, so I took the position at Unum because I was excited by the challenge of being in a new department and being there to lay the foundations of it. So I came from Anthem, had a really strong culture. A lot of the leaders there had worked there for a very long time, from when the department was new. And I thought it would be beneficial and exciting to be at that phase of things, to be at the start, lay the foundations, build the department, be
Sure.
future leader. So, Devin himself, I obviously interviewed with him, and I thought I would like working for him, and I was right about that. And I happened to know through 30 Under 30 somebody else on his team. So, I knew they were hiring strong talent and had a good vision for the department. I would say to retain talent, I think honesty goes a long way. If you have driven and successful people on your team, they're going to understand that corporate America, especially large corporations, things can't happen immediately, and a lot of things are a game of politics or a game of chess and not checkers. So just being honest about, you have a future here. I potentially can't do something right now, but I'm looking out for you. I think that goes a long way, and people are going to be less tempted to leave if they think, the long term is going to be good for them, even if in the short term they can't be immediately rewarded.
Yeah, and I think, listen, I think that your generation has been lucky enough that you haven't had to go through an event like we're starting to go through with COVID-19, right? You haven't gone through a shakeup, a holy cow, and I think this probably is educating your age group right now on, wow, I really, and listen, I think that job hopping every couple of years to bring yourself up the ladder is a viable option. But at the same time, this is the first time in your careers that you're starting to see, wow, we just went from 7 million open jobs to 6 million unemployed in a month and a half, 2 months, right? There might be something to this, sticking around in corporate America for 10 years and having some security, as I'm starting to think about all the other life events that are taking place inside of my life rather than that. So I think it's a really, as horrible as an event that it is, I think it's a good learning exercise for both your generation and the generation below you, because some of us old timers have lived through a couple of these events, and we understand the value proposition in sticking around inside of a corporation that's done us right in the past, and living through the thin times as well. Like, I get some people who are like, oh my God, I didn't get my bonus this year. I'm out of here. And I'm like, yeah, and it's not always about the annual bonus. That's why it's an add-on to your compensation, not a guarantee, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you all just got to get in the boat and row the boat, man. Unfortunately, that's how it happens, right?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say one more thing. So, I think millennials get a bad rap for job hopping, but I don't think it's very common that people, including millennials, go into a job thinking like, I'll be here 2 years and then I'll move on. I don't think people would find a lot of success with that, because if you go into a job with one foot out the door, you're probably not going to be mentally invested enough to really make impact and be successful there. And then, probably if you're not successful there, you're not going to be competitive for other jobs. So, people, I guess, find financial success changing jobs frequently, but I don't think most people go into their career with that as their intention. So I think it's important to go into a job expecting to be there for the long haul, having that attitude and approach, but still being open to those other opportunities, because sometimes something does come along that's tempting enough to make you switch.
Yeah, and listen, good management, in my opinion, good management has always been, I've always tried to take my juniors and mid career folks and get them ready for their next role, right? And sometimes I can't offer that inside of my organization, because as you go higher up in the roles, there's less and less roles. I mean, there's 20 junior associates, there's 15 managers, there's 4 directors, and there's 1 chief procurement officer, right? And by the way, the average life expectancy of a chief procurement officer is like 18 months in this country in role. So job hopping is job hopping. Everybody's job hopping. But I think that good management is trying to get you to that next level within 2 or 3 years. I think that's enough time. If you're not getting your people into that next, presented for that next step up in their careers in 2 to 3 years, number one, you're probably not doing a great job of managing people. And number two, you're going to lose the faith of your team. And if that's not inside of your organization, then that's the reality of your organization. That you don't have that role available. There isn't an open slot for them to go to. My goal would be to position somebody like you to be successful at the next level. And if I'm lucky enough to have something when you're ready, great, I'll keep you with me. And if not, I'm going to give you one hell of a recommendation, because you might come back to me as a VP in 3 or 4 years, right?
Yeah.
So I think that as long as management's aware of that, then that's a good play to take. I'm going to take another question. What's the this is a fantastic question again from Ernie. What is the hardest part for you to gain credibility with stakeholders who may be deep subject matter experts and so much more, and have so much more work experience? So how do you get credibility? What's the most difficult part about gaining credibility when you're in a room with people who've got, a decade, 15 years, 20 years of experience?
Yeah, so I think as much as you can, definitely doing homework. So if you have access to tools for market research, so as I mentioned in the beginning, I've managed a lot of categories and they're very wide-reaching, and I'm definitely not an expert on the majority of them. So I think coming and showing that you have done research to understand the space as it currently stands, going a long way. And then I think also not undermining that stakeholder goes a long way. So bringing them to the table, telling them, I'm going to be the expert in strategic sourcing, and you're going to be the expert in the subject that we're sourcing. And we're going to work together to solve this problem and get the fairest value for our organization. That's going to enable you to invest elsewhere. So letting them have a seat at the table and really showing that expertise and indicating to them that you understand that they are the expert there, I think that goes really far.
Yeah. Let's talk about advice. What type of advice do you have for hiring department managers when they're trying to find folks like you? What should they be talking to you about, or not you, but the group as a whole? And what type of, so let's talk about hiring managers in HR departments. What advice can you give them about working with millennials in our industry today?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about two things I've already mentioned so far. So kind of that flexibility. I am actually somebody who prefers to work in the office, but knowing that I have the ability and flexibility to work from home if I have to, something comes up, or I need to go somewhere for something going on in my personal life, and I can work from that place. That's going to be important, and it shows that you trust the person that you're trying to hire. And then also something that really speaks to me personally, and I think a lot of driven people, is again that ownership, that you're going to be in charge of this. You're going to have kind of the power to impact change, but you're going to have that leader in that department standing behind you and there to, again, bounce ideas off of and give you different perspectives on things.
Yeah. So we're going to give you some guidance, but we're not going to micromanage it, right?
Right.
Yeah. Great. Quick question for you, and I meant to ask it to you earlier, and then I kind of lost my train of thought. Now I'm back to it now. I'm interested in, given the fact that you're a digital native, what are your thoughts on, and I don't want you to try and wrap this up for your entire generation, but what are your thoughts on the digitalization of procurement and sourcing as a whole? I mean, there's a lot of technology out there right now. Your generation is keenly able to recognize, adapt, and use technology very, very quickly. Where do you think we're at from an industry perspective, and how far do you think we have to go?
So I think COVID-19 is going to force a lot of people to move faster than they expected. So, it's 2020, so pretty much all of our functions are digitized, but the gaps are having all of the different digital solutions work together seamlessly. So a lot of organizations have like one tool for a contract repository, one tool to do the accounts payable function, one tool track spend. And so I think large organizations figuring out how to make those work together more fluidly enables their employees to spend less time getting to the spend and data analysis and then actually being able to do something with that analytics. And then also just the troubleshooting of figuring out why this purchase order wasn't paid or the contract expired in this system. How do you get those systems to talk to each other? Having those work automatically will really make things more efficient.
Yeah, so you've essentially grown up in an era where systems integration and operability is kind of seamless, right? You can make a post to 3 different, 4 different, 5 different social channels. You can book travel reservations and all of a sudden it shows up inside of your calendar. Everything seems to just kind of flow. And what you're seeing, and you're spot on, is that enterprise systems architecture aren't necessarily in an optimum place where they could be based on what you're seeing out in the consumer market and what you've grown up with.
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah. And even integrating with things like if you have an information security team out of procurement that has to review new third parties, so new suppliers coming on, they're likely to have a different system than you work with. So a lot of it has to do with politics too, getting everybody to agree to one system or at least 2 systems that work together well.
Yeah. If we could just get it to 2 systems from 7 systems, I'd be
Yeah.
happy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. If we could just get to 2 professional services teams versus 7, that would be fantastic. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. One quick question I'd like to end with. If there's one piece of advice that you can give to folks in your age bracket right now around attacking the marketplace, getting the most success for themselves, and just straight out killing it like you are, what would you tell folks?
I would say to put your name out there, even if you're uncomfortable about it. So for your internal brand, being the person that's willing to do the grunt work, that's willing to take on the new projects, and that even goes past work. So if people are like going out for a drink after work or doing a volunteer event on the weekend or during work, do those things. It's going to be in your benefit if people know your name. And also you're going to enjoy work more if you know your colleagues. Be that helpful person, both internal to your team, to your department, and to others. You're somebody who has the ability to research to get to an answer, and you do that. People are going to remember that, and that's going to be great for your reputation. And then also for your external brand, take the opportunities where you have them. You know, doing a live Q&A session, I'm not going to pretend like I was extremely comfortable coming into this, but you know, you take those opportunities where you have them, and getting out of your comfort zone is going to help you grow as a person and professionally. Yeah.
Well, Devin, you got your work cut out for you, man, because there's a lot of senior leadership inside of the procurement that's going to be taking a look at this video. So I wish you all the best. This was enlightening for me. I got to go back and thank Mark Raffin for his introduction to you, almost a year and a half ago now.
Yeah.
To think that it took this long to pay the dividends, I guarantee you that it will not be that long again before we interact again. I think you bring a really, really unique perspective to our industry. I've got a half a dozen pieces of content that I think you and I will be talking about more in the future. And I love what you told people, which is get out there, put yourself out there. It's not always right, but at least it's out there, right? So wow, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. You did an amazing job, and I really, really thank you for your time today. Thanks, Caitlin. It was great.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you, by the way, to everybody who asked the questions. And we look forward to the next time we can get you on another Procurement Foundry event.
Yeah, I look forward to it as well.
Great. Take care. Oh, I'm sorry. One last thing, Caitlin. I'm sorry. I apologize. One last thing. Caitlin did want to do a shout out. So you wanted to talk a little bit about literally the most recent events, like literally overnight down south. So I wanted to give you a minute to do that as well. So feel free, go ahead. You want to talk a little bit about some of the weather that took place last night?
Yeah, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. So my new position, which I relocated for at Unum, is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm not physically there right now, but the Southeast, including Chattanooga, North Georgia, I think a few other states were hit by some pretty bad tornadoes last night. I think it's still developing kind of the extent of the damage, but it's looking pretty bad so far. So, you know, if you have the ability to help once those ways to help are kind of published by the news resources, please do so. You know, it's a challenging time already with COVID-19, so this is just adding additional challenge to that region.
Yeah. Yet another testament to the type of person that you are, that when we came on earlier today, even before this show, your comment to me was, the one thing I want to make sure that we do before we sign off is say a little something for those folks that are in peril right now. So truly an amazing person. Thanks again, Caitlin. Have a great time, and I look forward to the next time we talk.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.